Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. There has been some new evidence emerging in the whole saga involving Conor Benn. It's really interesting stuff. According to the Times, they've brought together a scientific team who claim that they have proven Conor Benn's innocence. Well, let's consider whether there is a case for his innocence. Having read the entire article from the Times, there are various scientists on board that make different arguments. And the one that stood out to me the most was a scientist called Dr. Serkan Kahayoglu, and I thought that his comments were quite interesting, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But the minute I put out this tweet, I had a backlash. Don't do this, Chris, you're overanalyzing again. Why are you trying to be intellectual? Why do you always have to go against the grain? No one's doing any of that. And a lot of these people are people that have praised me, by the way, for being willing to stand up against public pressure when it came to the whole Usyk-Fury negotiations, and even though I'd never ever absolved Fury of any responsibility, the very fact that I had dared to question Alexander Usyk's demands on that final hurdle of 70-30 in his favour has led to a whole bunch of people calling me biased. It's led to people unsubscribing, my view account has dropped dramatically, and now those people who were defending me and praising me for that are now saying these sorts of comments. Why are you doing that? Don't you know by now that I'm not affiliated with any promotional company or fighter? This is just me trying to be fair and objective. I am a member of a jury, essentially, and I'm observing both the arguments of the defense and the prosecution in this evolving matter. And from there, I will then end up making my decision. But what I have said is that it would take something remarkable for me to be convinced that Conor Benn is innocent at this stage. Well, if Kahayoglu's comments do stand up to scientific scrutiny, and we will get into this, well, then it is something remarkable, isn't it? Well, first and foremost, he employed a doctor called Mohammed Enayet, and he claims to be an expert in functional and personalized medicine. He's a London-trained GP, and he brought on another professor who claims to be an authority on the pharmacology of clomifene in order to review the findings of the data from Conor Benn's positive tests. And Enayet claims that without a doubt, we've proved its contamination 100%. Well, let's consider whether there's any value to that statement. One of the things that they begin to argue is that Conor Benn's biology means that he's slow to metabolize a substance like clomiphene, and therefore he's going to accumulate stores of the substance while also showing elevated levels of estrogen as a result. In other words, his body is slow to process it. It builds up storage of clomiphene, and that can show up on a test. Now, at this point, it's not impossible, of course. Not everybody consumes and processes things in different ways. Take caffeine, for instance. We'll use coffee because I'm sure you guys all drink coffee. There are some people that will have 1 cup of coffee and they're alert and they're raring to go. There are others that will have 5 cups of coffee and they feel nothing. They've become almost desensitized to it, or they'll process it more quickly. Same applies to alcohol and so on and so forth. Everybody's body's different. And that's an argument that they've put forward. Now, at this point, I'm not really enamored with this argument, but Serkan Kahayoglu's argument I do find a lot more interesting. This is a scientist who's been published in 70 national and international journals, and he's a cited scientist and expert on this field. And one of the published studies that he put together, he assessed, and I quote, human urinary clomiphene metabolites after consumption of eggs from clomiphene treated laying hens and the intake of clomiphene capsules. So what he did is he observed 2 groups of volunteers. One of them were given clomiphene capsules, so they were given it as a drug. In other words, the way you might take it if you are engaging in performance-enhancing drugs. The other group was given eggs that were obtained from a hen that had been administered clomiphene. So what did the study find? It found that after the consumption of clomiphene-containing eggs, Z4-HC accounted for over 90% of the hydroxy metabolites that were found in the urine. In contrast, 8 of the 9 participants who received the oral tablet, in other words, the actual drug, found that EZ-clomiphene citrate Z3-HC, a metabolite of E-clomiphene, accounted for 80% of the HC metabolites. Now, let me try and put this in layman's terms. Let's use caffeine as an example and coffee again. We'll stick to that analogy. Let's say, for argument's sake, you produce a different color. We'll use colors. You produce a different color of residue when you drink coffee compared to when you take a caffeine supplement. Now, on the day of a fight, you are not allowed to take a caffeine supplement. It is a performance-enhancing drug only on the day of the fight. Let's say green is what is left behind in your blood if you were to take a supplement, and purple is what's left behind if you were to take coffee. Now, you claim I've had 10 cups of coffee on the day of the fight. I did not knowingly go and take a performance-enhancing drug of caffeine. I have not cheated. Well, by extracting your blood, if I see these little purple elements within it, I know that you're telling the truth. If I see green in there, I think it's unlikely you're telling the truth, right? That's just obviously a very simplistic analogy just to try and explain what it is that Kahayoglu is claiming here. He goes on to state that Conor Benn's urine results have confirmed that clomifene 4-hydroxy metabolites of M1 and M2, which are Z4HC metabolites, were the main metabolites which were detected in the doping analysis test, which is a confirmatory sign, according to him, that their positive test was a natural result of consumption of clomiphene containing eggs. And it would be unfair to blame Conor Benn due to the positive doping test result for the clomiphene. You understand that? So he's essentially claiming that it was green. Now, just to add to that, if you go back and check out the video I've done, because I've covered this topic extensively 7 months ago, called Conor Benn Fails 2 Tests, WADA study on eggs and clomiphene, and Dr. Usman Sajjad, you will see that within that I explain that since 2011, there have been a massive rise in clomiphene cases among athletes. And the question is why? Clomiphene stays in your system for a very long time. So the chances of getting away with clomiphene usage, which is a masking agent for steroids in some cases, is not the most intelligent thing to do. So perhaps it could explain that the increase coincides with a number of farmers using clomiphene in their eggs because it increases the production of their eggs. However, one of the people who did sort of tweet me to question me was at Z388Z, and I do love chatting to you. I'm not sure if this is James Becker with an alternative account, by the way, but whoever you are, I do really enjoy talking to you. I've got no problem with anybody, like I said, but since you were one of the people to question me, you did copy me in this particular thread of Ross Tucker, who is a sports scientist. But I'm not actually disagreeing with anything Ross says here. He sort of reinforces my position that Kahayoglu's statements are interesting. He says, firstly, what is an expert in functional and personalized medicine? As a field, I mean. The bit about the isomer difference between eggs versus synthetic, the E versus Z difference, is interesting. And if that is clear-cut, as in the eggs are always one type and the artificial is always the other, then you don't need all the other stuff about toxins and unique metabolism and his unique epigenetics, all of which is a major overreach anyway. Reality is that if it's clear cut that two sources appear differently in the urine, then he has a strong case. If it's not clear cut, then he's using all the other stuff as a shiny toy, as a distraction, to make it look compelling. Would it be interesting to know the overlap in ranges of the isomer form of the metabolite? Maybe they overlap and that's why this unique metabolism is necessary. Like dog pharmacology, detoxification epigenetics is a new one to me. Maybe that's an established field of research, but I've never heard of it. From the article, the only solid research is the paper that tested the isoforms from food versus doping sources. The rest feels like smoke and mirrors to me. So again, that goes back to Kahayoglu's claims. So I'm saying, if this is true, what Kahayoglu's saying, if they can prove, and going back to the analogy that I used, that different types of residue are left, different colors, right? That different analogy, then it becomes more clear cut. Now, I don't think it's 100% clear cut because he said 8 of the 9 participants. So whatever the case, there is going to be some areas of discrepancy, but nonetheless, is it a consistent pattern? And if so, it's a strong argument for Conor Benn. So you can't just dismiss that, but I do want to give you an analogy here as to why I disagree with Ross regarding this idea that everything else is smoke and mirrors. If you're considering a court case, you add a bunch of building blocks rather than just one significant building block. And I want to give you a little storyline, a little anecdote as an analogy. I want you to imagine that I'm a lawyer and I have got a client, and this client has been accused of murdering someone. The accusation was that he was stalking somebody at a seafood restaurant. He was eating a nice platter of shellfish as he waited for his victim to exit this seafood restaurant. And when he did exit, he attacked him with a hammer and he murdered him. And then he was arrested and now he is on trial. Well, if I'm able to show that actually my particular client sent a text message from London, this murder occurred in Bournemouth. It was an hour before the murder took place. There's no way you can get from London to Bournemouth in an hour and to have carried out this murder. So this proves that he's innocent. That essentially is a massive building block in my favor. In the same way that if Kayoglu's argument proves to be true, it's a significant defense mechanism for Conor Benn. However, that's not going to stop me saying, yeah, but also the murderer was right-handed according to the trajectory of the blows of the hammer. My client is left-handed. In addition to that, my client is allergic to shellfish. So how could he have been there eating shellfish? Your waiter's got this wrong. In other words, I add as many building blocks as I can to further reinforce the argument. So where does this whole thing about detoxification, epigenetics, this idea that he basically stores up clomiphene a lot more than other people, where does this fit into this wider argument? Well, for those of you that are wondering, is he really going to go down this argument that he slows down the detoxification of clomiphene, and if so, where does this actually fit in? You have to consider some past comments that he's made. You see, Conor Benn has spoken about his diet in the past, and in that he does not mention a massive consumption of eggs or meat. He says, I don't really eat meat except a little steak at the weekends, which is all I can stomach, but only when it's cremated. It's not a moral thing. I used to love my meat, but when I went vegetarian, I found it really beneficial, and now I can't stomach chicken or lamb or pork or anything like that. So we know he's not getting it from chicken meat. He does go on to say sometimes he'll have an omelette. That's not really conducive with a massive amount of consumption of eggs. So by claiming, in addition to the fact that the way you metabolize the actual residue from eggs is different, he needs to also make a case as to how he would possibly have eaten so many eggs that it built up within his system. And that's why I believe they're going down this route of saying, well, he actually stores it. So they can later on make the case that I don't actually have to eat that many eggs in order for me to get this amount of clomiphene in my system, because I have read different accounts. Some accounts claim you'd have to take as many as 20 eggs a day in order to achieve the amount of clomiphene in your system that would lead to a positive test. Others claim actually it would probably be around 34 eggs a week, which is not impossible for weightlifters that love eggs and go and have 5 egg omelets a day and stuff like that. However, that is not conducive with what Conor Benn has said himself about his own diet. So a cynic could argue that they've observed this, they've considered it, and preemptively to that sort of criticism, they're saying, well, hold on a sec, Conor Benn wouldn't actually need 34 eggs a week. He could achieve these sorts of levels with much fewer eggs because his metabolism is different. And I think that's where Ross Tucker has sort of missed the point as to why they're doing what they're doing. The question is, do you believe Conor Benn? That's up to you. What I will say is this, though. I've always said it would take something remarkable to convince me. If Kayoglu's argument does not stand up to scientific scrutiny, then I'm going to have to end up saying, Conor Benn, you have no real case here. If it does stand up to scientific scrutiny, though, he still has to find a way to explain how many eggs he was having a day, how that led to him getting this positive test, and in addition to that, explain to me where you got your eggs from. And why is that significant? Because the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said that the Veterinary Medicines Directorate is not aware of clomiphene's usage in the UK, and there's no evidence that it exists in the British food chain, but that a small percentage of eggs are imported. In other words, it's very unlikely that you came across these contaminated eggs, let alone the fact that if you did you really consume enough of them? There needs to be a process where you show where you typically purchased your eggs from. Now, I know there's going to be a crowd of you out there that says, well, okay, it's not been found in the food chain and there's no evidence of it, but there was a case of that prior to horse meat being discovered too, and that was in the food chain. Yes, it's not impossible, but the onus is now on you. You are the one, because of strict liability, that has failed the test and has to prove what occurred here. Where do you tend to shop? Do you go to a specific farm? Do you get your eggs from Tesco's? What has occurred for you to be in a position where you may have consumed this? You have to be able to provide the evidence. And as far as we're aware, saying that this is possible is not a defense. It's possible, yeah, sure. But is it likely for you in your specific case? You need to make a case for that. And right now, that case does not exist. So, listen, Kayoglu's argument, if it's clear-cut, as Ross Tucker says, then it is a massive building block in favour of Conor Benn. If it's not clear-cut, And I suspect it's not, because, as he said, 8 of the 9 participants it's applied to, which means you are going to have a percentage where it does not apply. If that is the case, how do you make the case that it got into your system? Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.